Hi, Mark.
Okay, and we are
Good evening.
live.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to call the May 11th, 2020 meeting of the University City Council to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Clay,
Present.
Councilmember Carr,
Present.
Councilmember McMahon,
Here.
Councilmember Hales,
Here.
Councilmember Kusick,
Present.
Councilmember Smotherson,
Here.
Mayor Crowe.
Here, thank you very much. And to our citizens who are watching, again, we're doing this meeting by Zoom, and we are trying to do, as hopefully you all understand, the best that we can under these challenging circumstances. Hopefully each week we get a little bit better at this, but we do understand that some glitches may occur, but hopefully we will be able to move through tonight's agenda in a fashion that is easy for everyone to watch, and for my colleagues on council to clearly understand what is going on and take those actions that are necessary. Before you, you have the agenda that has been provided to you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Motion by Ms. Carr. Is there a second? There's a second by Mr. McMahon. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. And I do believe tonight I can actually see everybody. I'm hoping that if you need to raise your hand between the city clerk and I, we can make sure that we get you get my attention. Before us, you have the April 27th, 2020 regular meeting minutes. Is there a motion that those minutes be approved? Motion by Mr. Clay. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Carr. Is there a discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. You have before you the April 29th, 2020 special meeting of the City Council. Is there a motion to approve? Motion approved by Mr. Hale, seconded by Mr. Smotherson. Any questions? Hearing none. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. As you know, we have citizen participation during the normal council meetings. Our council meetings, while we're doing them by Zoom, the comments made by the public are to be into the city clerk by noon of the day of the meeting, and are to provide both the citizen's name and their address. The city clerk has provided all of the comments to us that meet those requirements, and all members of council have them before them. So I'd like to thank the citizens for making those comments available to us. We now have before us the consent agenda. The consent agenda, Mr. Rose, is there anything we need to discuss about this, or can I just have them, or can I do a motion to approve?
Mayor, the consent agenda consists of those items that we think are more routine
Right.
in nature and can be approved by one action of
I
the council.
apologize. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Motion by Ms. Carr, seconded by Mr. McMahon. Is there discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. City Manager's report, Mr. Rose.
Mayor, this first item asks that the council hear a update from Trigger's representatives on the space needs study and provide any feedback that you believe is appropriate. I believe Mr. Appleson is going to introduce the speakers.
Hello, good evening. The study, the city space needs analysis was a study approved by City Council, authorized to start in the beginning, in the end of last calendar year. in about December, our consultant Trivers has started work and completed certain phases of this work. Up to this point, Trivers collected existing conditions documentation. They have completed a programming and visioning session. This time signifies a point where the results from those phases are ready to share with our city council, and Trivers representatives will present those results with you tonight, ask for additional input, as well as give you a brief summary of what the next steps will look like, along with a very estimated schedule of completion of the project that has already been slightly delayed due to the circumstances, but hopefully not so much. Amy Gilbertson is the principal in charge of Trivers, and she's who I'd like to turn the presentation over at this point.
Ms. Gilbert?
Hey, everyone. So Mike, will you be pulling up the presentation, or should I just walk through it since everybody has it? Oh, here we go.
There you go.
Okay, good to see you all again. Sorry, it's not in person. But yes, thanks, Sinan, for the introduction. So we were last with this group, I believe, in September, and we have produced some more work that we'd like to share with you tonight. So Mike, you can go ahead and go to the first part, the next slide. So our last project, we were really focused on looking at the, oh, you can go back one. Maybe. Well, I can speak to the last one, even if it's not on your screen. Can everyone still hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So we were focused on the annex before, and then there was a request to look at more facilities and more departments. And so for that purpose, we've added to our team our project manager, Amanda Trumper, who will be helping me present tonight. Amanda has a lot of workplace experience, as well as experience with existing buildings, so she was a great fit for this project. We maintained our partnership with HOK, as you know, who has been doing the justice planning portion of this work for us. And we also added WPA to help us with the survey, which was really critical in understanding how things are going from the employee perspective and where we had different challenges and opportunities. So you can go to the next slide. So the next one, as it's pulling up here, is really just outlining our project goals. And we did include a lot of text on this presentation, not sure that we would actually ever be able to present in person. So we're grateful for this Zoom meeting. But we really wanted to understand what program requirements exist with university city departments now. We also thought it was really important to engage the public and get their feedback on how they have experienced dealing with the different departments of university city. We also wanted to survey the departments and, as I said, come up with a more complete program for each of them. And so the list of departments here we'll talk about a little bit on the next slide also. But eventually we'll be getting to a place where we have a space planning option and a cost estimate. So really what we're talking to you about tonight is the first three components of this project. So you can go to the next one now, please. So the next slide, once it comes up here, it outlines the 9 different buildings that were in our project scope, as well as the 9 departments that we worked with to understand their program. I know you all have this document, so I won't go through them all, but we did also want to map them just to give a greater understanding of where these facilities are in relationship to each other. I can go to the next one. Within this package, we've included just a few images of each of the buildings. Conditions drawings, we verified them. Where we didn't have existing conditions drawings, we created them. And so this is really important to understand kind of what do we have to work with before we embark on the next phase of the project. So here are some beautiful images of City Hall that you all are very familiar with, I'm sure. The next one, Mike, if you want to flip forward. Again, we informed everyone quite a bit on our last exercise about the annex building. For this project, we also went into the Trinity building to understand the potential there. We also have the modular police facility on this page as well. So just verifying that. And then to round out the rest of our existing conditions, documentation and surveying, we went to the Heman Park Community Center, which is on the next page. A small portion of Centennial Commons, the administrative area. We visited the recycling station because we know that's a place that the community engages with quite a bit. Park maintenance, the public works yard, the sign shop, the central garage, and the transfer station. So this is just a little overview of the many hours that our team spent on site and on the ground understanding these buildings. The next slide. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda because Amanda was really critical in leading the charge on the programming effort that our team conducted with the various departments, as well as finalizing all of our existing conditions documentation.
Thanks, Amy. So we did verify each of these buildings, and part of that verification was, really to understand their age, their condition, as well their size, right? Because we're going to be looking at this further down the line as to, who fits best where, how can these buildings be best utilized, acknowledging that we've got a couple of buildings that are not really being utilized right now. So we're really, at the beginning stages of this, really trying to just get a lot of data together. And what you'll see here is our understanding of the building's, approximate age, where they're located, and as well the available square footage of each. And you'll see, City Hall and Annex have quite a bit, and then it kind of goes from there, all appropriate to each of their programs right now. We can go to the next slide. What we did learn, though, is what we have available, including the currently not used Annex and Trinity building. We've got, across all of these buildings that we've studied, we've got about 110,000 square feet available. Part of this process, we were also tallying basically the existing program footprint for each of these departments, as well as validating what size they ideally would be in the future, whether it's for growth or for better functionality as relates to conferencing or better departmental adjacencies. And so what we learned was the current square footage, the current footprint of existing university city departments is about 90,000 square feet. But our proposed amount of square footage needed based on understanding better the growth of these departments and what will ideally suit them is closer to 101,000 square feet. And just high level, this let us know that with the existing building assets that we've got inside of this study, that 110,000 square feet should hold 101,000 square feet worth of program. And that was kind of our first test to just make sure we were even kind of in the realm of reality for the departments that we were studying. You can go to the next slide. So from here, that initial validation, we also, part of the validating and part of the learning about all this was to get surveys out to the public and also to the staff. And I'll start here with the public. So we really kind of wanted to understand, who's using these facilities, how public facing are these departments, and which of these facilities and departments are engaging the most externally with the public. All of this is really to say we want to make sure that that as we study adjacencies and locations, that we're best putting these departments in the best spot to serve the public. So just this first slide is just kind of our general demographics out of the respondents. And we've got a little over 100 responses. We had the survey out for about 2.5 weeks. 38% of our respondents were over the age of 65. The majority, almost majority of them have lived in the university city for 25 plus years, large majority, in fact, yeah, so even 30 plus years. So we're looking at longtime residents who are participating in this study, which is great. And we were also asking about accessibility. That's something that's really important to know when we're studying spaces. And so we asked about if the respondents identified as disabled, and it was a low percentage, but we just wanted to understand that demographic as well. You can go to the next slide. And so we learned through this, through the survey, who was using which building the most and which departments were being used the most. So this slide really talks about the departments, public works being very public engaging, planning and development also. Some of these are not surprises. Parks and Recreation, part of Parks and Recreation that we were studying for this is just the admin building. I think a lot of the responses, definitely based on the feedback and the comments that we got after, were really responding to the Centennial Commons as a whole. And so I think that kind of bolstered the Parks and Rec facing part of this part of the study. That's not to say Parks and Rec is incredibly publicly facing, but for that small admin area, that might have skewed some of the results. We've also got city management as very public facing, and obviously the police department. And so we kind of ranked those as kind of our highest level public engaging departments. From there, we asked, which buildings are you visiting the most? And so we can go to the next slide. And so the first building that's visited the most frequently was City Hall. And you'll see with each of these buildings, the most frequented, we looked at it, we got a lot of feedback, and so we tried to concise it down into these word clouds to really kind of prioritize and overlap some of the things that we heard kind of over and over again. So you'll see the weighted, the words weighted by just how much we were hearing back on similar topics. And so, we learned that, what are you doing at City Hall? For the most part, we've heard, there's a lot of permits that happen there, meetings, licenses, things like that. So a lot of business. The challenges that we heard were that the elevators and stairs are a challenge to that building, as well as accessibility. We heard a little bit about wayfinding and some parking. And then we asked about impressions, and I think we all agree City Hall is beautiful, and that really stood out from the feedback that we got from the public. The elevator kind of bled into this category as well, and some concern about just the voluminous nature of the space, and some accessibility kind of re-entered the conversation as well. I'll go to the next slide. The police facility, same categories, the functions that people are performing there, between paying fines, tickets, getting information, crime reports, things like that. The challenges to the police facility, we learned were the limited parking and the fact that it is a temporary structure really stuck out there. And then for impressions, similarly, it echoes the challenge, a desire for a permanent structure. And we heard in a couple of cases for people for a preservation and a reuse of historic buildings for the police, that they deserve a new facility. You can go to the next slide. The recycling center was also highly visited, which that did not come to a surprise to anybody. And that one is pretty perfunctory. Everybody's recycling cardboard. Some people find it difficult to reach the bins, or if they're overflowing. And there is an impression that it could be a little bit more brightly lit or better maintained, feel a little less isolated, just for a sense of safety. The next one. And then the community center, the Heman Park Community Center, that's also a highly visited building. People are going there for meetings, events, commission meetings. There's a plant sale that happens And then the challenges to that building are, we heard about pathway lighting and a bike route. We also learned a little bit about ADA parking, maybe closer to the front entry, or maybe a revised entry. And impressions, people are saying that it needs updating, but that it's worth updating, which is nice to hear those two things together. And some renovations, potentially some improvements to the parking lot. Next. From there, so we took all of that public stuff, and that was its own survey. We also, we engaged with WPA to do an internal survey with the staff. And we got good participation with that. We got 76 responses on that. That was open for about 2 weeks as well. And this survey was really to learn about how the city employees are working and collaborating. And so what we learned was that we've got a lot of office-based employees, but we also surveyed the public works staff, police, everybody that's in the field and labor. It wasn't just an office space inclined survey. We opened it up to everyone. We learned that departments are siloed in meaning that they really tend to work independently in a lot of ways. And people work in primarily low collaboration environments. We learned that people would desire a little bit more collaboration, and that's something that space can support for sure. So that's something good to learn at this point. And that, you know, some of the recommendations as well to support both focus and collaboration spaces, a little bit more greater learning and flexibility and inclusion. We heard the word inclusion, and making sure that we keep key connections between departments and make sure that those are strengthened where we can. And we can go to the next slide. So some of the cool analytics that we got out of the WPA survey, we learned about collaboration. And this is a slide that you could study a little bit more after this. It's actually pretty interesting, but I'll just kind of overview it. We learned about the tasks and tools that people use to do what parts of their jobs. That's kind of the first part that's really good to validate. The next part, we learned what kind of collaboration people were doing. Was it virtual? Was it physical? Are these face-to-face meetings? Is it emails? And so we learn also from that who's virtually communicating with whom, or physically or otherwise. So this also helps us to prioritize who goes where, who needs better proximity, just physical proximity. And then we also learned about the flow of information. So this shows you again which departments are talking to whom the most. It's weighted. These are actually pretty fun to look at a little bit more, but I won't spend too much extra time on this slide. We can go to the next one. And then we learned about attitudinal feedback, which is really us gauging how people were prioritizing things that would increase satisfaction. And so, you know, and this varies widely by organization. We learned that technology is at the top of the satisfaction list. What that means is if you're happy with satisfaction, your overall satisfaction will, or if you're happy with technology, your overall satisfaction will be greater. And so learning what things would impact and improve overall satisfaction the most. So we learned that technology was right up there. Inclusion and learning and development were always prioritized. We also learned from programming that that the city is doing a good job of doing that right now. We learned that people are, employees are looking for a little bit greater need for distraction-free space. And that we also learned that aesthetics and amenities were ranked lowest, which in some ways could suggest that, you know, desire for refreshing or interior layout could improve that importance factor as well. We can go to the next slide. And so again, there's a lot of words, like Amy said, we weren't sure if we'd get to be in front of you. I'll just briefly go through, and this kind of reiterates, but this is the summary that, that what we learned was, you know, there is a concern about distractions, being able to do focused work, and that, you know, the opportunity to provide better focus spaces in the future would be something for us to look at. Learning and development is always highly prioritized, and for maybe providing for more spaces for formal instruction, higher than even processes like learning processes or informal instruction, which also occurs highly in the city. Effective work process, we learned a little bit about that. The space needs study won't so much address that, but we did learn about how some processes, areas where improving collaboration could improve processing, which is where we can come in. And then with public interactions, we learned that, and no surprise here, that there's a large amount of time spent interacting directly with the public through various channels. And that was good to confirm, good to know who's doing the most of it. And that we also learned that there's not anticipation that the ways in which they're interacting with the public will change very much. Technology versus face-to-face, no expectation that will change very much inside of the next 5 years. And we can go to the next one. So those were the surveys, and those were kind of done kind of anonymously, sent out, public versus internal staff. What we also did during this time is we sat down with each of the 9 departments, always with the department head, sometimes with a few extra additional employees invited to the table, and spent a couple of hours with each department, and learned a lot more about their existing space, what works, what doesn't work, their thoughts about growth or challenges. So what we learned is, and the good news is it's really fantastic. In fact, there was a lot of consensus among departments. We really heard a lot of the same things. There wasn't nobody was really asking for one thing that might conflict with the desire of another. Everything was really aligned, and that was a really great thing to learn, especially early on in this. So we were able to, in a similar way, concise our learnings from all of these extensive interviews into some more word clouds that really shows us what stood out the most across departments. And as far as strengths go, there's a culture that really appreciates their personal offices here, really likes the culture here. There's been some really great changes and innovations in the culture, and we heard a lot about that. We also heard really good things about technology and the modernization that's happening across the board. And we also learned that everyone's very proud of the way in which they're able to serve the public. What we learned about challenges was it sounds like there's a lack of meeting space. There's some concern in a few sectors about security, and recruitment and retention came up a little bit. Accessibility, that echoes a lot of what we're hearing with the other studies. And then a little bit more flexibility seemed like a challenge, and the break area. This relates to the amenities part that we were kind of talking about with the survey. And then as far as opportunities, looking for ways in this next, round to improve collaboration, accessibility, potentially the workstation model, the amenities, the break room, kind of, the challenges become the opportunities a lot of times with these things. Some huddle spaces. So yeah, this is just a good summary of everything that we heard. And then you can go to the next slide. And so all of that is really to say that what will happen after this, and after we're here to hear if we missed asking any questions or getting any feedback about any of the facilities or departments, we're here to hear that from council today. But subsequent to this meeting, then we will move on into looking at a couple of options and ways in which to solve spatially for some of these challenges and opportunities. And that's it.
So were there any questions from the mayor and council or any feedback to provide?
Yes, as soon as
Yes.
to full screen, I see Jeff Hale's hand up. So if we can go to Mr.
Yes.
Actually, I think I was second to Stacy.
Well, Mr. Clay.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Hales. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. So in looking at this, and I'm on the last, I'm focusing specifically on the last page, option 1 and option 2. There are 4 elements in each. 3 of the elements in each are identical. There is 1 element that is different. And it's my understanding that we're not making a formal declaration on either one of these options this evening. So let me ask this. That's part A. Let me ask the city manager that.
That's correct.
Okay. But in presenting these, and I've mentioned this in the past, forgive me if that's my microphone. These options, again, 3 of the elements are identical. So we're really just talking about one element that's different. And they're presented kind of as casual may not be the right word, but as these options which are effectively making a generational decision. Because if we go the option of separating police and municipal courts, that leads us down one very distinct path. If we decide to consolidate them, that leads us down another. And so wherever we end up on this, whether we go with one consolidated facility or 2 or however, I certainly have my thoughts on that. I think it needs to be very purposeful in our decision making. And I know my colleagues are thoughtful, so I know it will be, but this feels a little bit like we are kind of blithely ambling towards a generational decision. And I just want to lift that up and get a clear understanding as to what the concrete next steps are.
Yeah, I think that the major next step is for there to be some decision about the police facility, where it's going to be located, what's going to be the appropriate size of it, whether municipal court will be a component or whether it's going to be separated. Some of that, as they've reflected here, the reason that there is a discussion about the separation between police and municipal court has to do with the Ferguson issue. And so I certainly believe that there is a desire by the Department of Justice to separate those operations as much as possible, but still trying to balance. There is still some collaboration that needs to occur. A good example is for municipal court, they will hold the files and police often need access to those files. So if you have a completely separated facility, then how do we address that particular issue? So I think that there are still some issues that we're going to need to hammer through, but ultimately the mayor and council will need to decide on whether it's a joint facility or whether it's a separate facility and what the size of that facility is going to look like. And then they will start the design work based upon the direction that we receive from you. And as simultaneously, we'll need to start identifying how do we not only fund the cost of a potential renovation or construction of a new facility for police and court, but how do we also fund the improvements that are needed throughout the city facilities?
Mr. Hales.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I don't know if anybody still needs this presentation on the screen. Is that still needed at this point? I
would prefer to see everybody's face if Mr. Carlin can do that. But go ahead with your question.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's a lot easier to see everyone we're talking to. So to Amanda and Amy, thank you. As you went through that, honestly, that provided a lot more detail in terms of the response from employees, and I was not expecting the depth of information that we just got there and that we had in our packet. So thank you. I did have one question. The only thing that surprised me a little bit in the nuts and bolts of what you discussed was the interactions with Public Works. And I noticed that I think it was on slide 10 of your slides, which was the interactions with the transfer station and the recycling. I was surprised that Public Works had as much interaction, and I was wondering if there was any sort of divvying up, whether that was a function of recycling and trash versus.
Hi, we are calling from Healthcare Advisor on behalf of United Health Group. Our ways to maximize your well-being and no cost.
We got Zoom bombed.
So my question with what was the Public Works had like among the highest interactions. I was expecting planning and development to be quite a bit higher, just from personal experience. There's always a line in there. So does the trash and recycle, people utilizing those services, is that lumped into the same Public Works department statistic showing that height or that significant usage, or was the administrative section of Public Works on the 4th floor in any way separated out?
So that was a very astute question. And we also had the same reaction. And that is also why I kind of glossed over the first part of it, because it similarly to the Parks and Rec thing, I think in the public's mind, as we got those questions answered, Public Works was totally associated with recycling and trash and all of that stuff. And so we did not see a lot of engagement about specifically visiting the Public Works administrative.
Can I just follow up with one more
Sure.
question? Can I ask of Mr. Alpaslin, who's on the call, but I think he's muted and we can't see him. Can he weigh in on how many members of the public actually come up to Public Works on the 4th floor?
We receive quite a few citizens here on our floor, but certainly not as many as the 4th floor, the Planning and Development Department, due to the permit interaction there with the public. So we issue a few permits here also, but the load for that is nowhere near what it is for the Planning and Development Department. Also, some in-person visits are attributed to the trash collection related inquiries. When our new citizens especially are in our building here, they make a stop on the 1st floor for getting their accounts, the trash and recycling service accounts, and they make their next visit pretty much to the 3rd floor to arrange for the delivery of their new carts. And so that's quite a few visits as such that we receive here.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I confused the 3rd and 4th floor. I tend to do that.
Mr. Clay, did you have a question? Did I cut you off? Are you?
No, sir.
Okay, Mr.
I
McMahon.
completed mine.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just, not to go against my colleague, Mr. Clay, but if the first two on option 1 and 2 are different, and the second 2 are different. It's only the bottom 2 that are the same. The first option, and I want to make sure I'm understanding it, is basically we've taken everybody out of their workspaces and have empty buildings and say, where can we best put these, regardless of how many moves that is. The second option on number 1, we're basically looking at it saying we're going to move as few people as possible. So am I understanding that correctly?
I believe that's correct.
And then we drop down to the second one, and one is saying separate police and courts, and the other one's keeping them together. But those options don't necessarily send us down. And I think what we're talking about is a separate police facility, a new building, as opposed to renovating. But I don't read that as to saying either one of those options forces one of those decisions, because we're taking the 110 square feet that we have and saying, where can we put these things? And we wouldn't be making that decision under either one of them. Neither one, option 1 or 2, forces us to say we're going to be building a new facility. Am I reading that right?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember McMahon, that's correct.
Okay. So these are really, I mean, to me, one is just, option one seems like we're really kind of working from a blank slate. We have certain operations, take them all out of the buildings and say, where would we best put them, regardless of how many moves this is going to take, and then separating courts and police.
I would ask Mr. Applesong to comment on that. I believe that's accurate.
So what is in the scope of Trigger's agreement is really the first bullet of each column here on this slide. And so as Councilmember McMahon described, the first one is to look at an ideal layout of everything. And so that's not taking into consideration where everything is in the existing shape. And the second one is to do that, but considering the existing formation of things and making as few moves as possible. And when this was first outlined in this manner, I think the second option had some economic concerns related to it. And so the second bullet of the police and municipal court being together or not is a component of that. But at this point, that is for us as staff to explore further and advise under the main principles of these options being the first bullet point on this slide.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
let me just clarify. I was just going to say, we're not asking the council, the mayor and council, to make any decisions tonight or even provide direction. Our next step will be to work through this with the staff and eventually bring forward to you a recommendation on how I would recommend proceeding. Certainly, you as a council will make that decision, but we will make a recommendation on it.
Mr. Smotherson.
Well, thank you, Mayor Crow. The question I have, and I'm trying to understand this, why doesn't it not indicate a new building for the police station? And is that going to be included? Because I was assuming that this report and option one included a decision or an option to build a new building for the police. So are you saying now with Councilman McMahon's explanation that that's not an option?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Smotherson, we're not saying, is it an option? Yes. I think that what we're attempting to do is simply present what all of the options are available to you. And then we will assign some cost with those various options and bring that information back to you. If you recall, we went through the initial study of the annex to determine was it usable first, and then secondly, was it usable for police? And that came back that yes, it can be used for police. So what we're doing at this point is exploring, well, what if we renovate the annex? What's the cost for that? Compare that to if we construct a new building, what is the cost for that? If we bring in municipal court, what's the cost for that in a new structure? And if we bring in municipal court to the annex, what's the cost for that? So there are a lot of moving parts on this. And right now we're just giving you an update on some of the things that are under consideration, as well as the process that we are going through.
And just and last, one other question, and that is there a breakdown in reference to this survey, the overall survey, is there a ward breakdown of this survey? I'm kind of curious to see how it was responded to by the wards, if that's possible.
I would defer that to Sinan or to Amy. I don't recall if there was a ward breakdown.
Amy or Amanda, if they can answer. I am not sure if ward designations were included.
We did not include ward designations in the demographic.
Okay.
Mr. Kusick.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a sort of a, when you were looking at the available building square footage totals and then the estimates of square feet needed for the different departments, I kind of look at all of the buildings that we have, the city hall and all of the other buildings with the space, sort of as a puzzle. And each puzzle piece or each of the spaces has just X amount of space or square footage in that. So when you look at what each department has stated that they would need, how would those needs fit into what the existing puzzle pieces would be? Did you take that into consideration? If I do the math quick and look at the departments that are currently in City Hall, there may not be enough space in City Hall for those departments. So has there been any consideration given as to how the different departments would switch around so that they would have enough space at the different locations? Does that make sense?
Yes, I understand the question, Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Cusick. I don't know that we've gotten to that level yet. This is just our first overview of all of the requests that have been received from the departments. That's not to say that I am going to recommend to you the amount of space that some of the departments have requested. If I am convinced that the space is indeed needed, then certainly that's something that I would recommend to you. But I have not had an opportunity to engage with staff to say, tell me why you need all of this space. And then just like the budget process, they often give you a wish list, but based upon the economy that exists today and the limited funding that exists today, we still must construct or renovate something that fits within the financial constraints that we have. So we'll go through that process. I'll work with the different department directors, identifying what it is that I'm comfortable in recommending to you. And then you as a council will make that decision. But we wanted to be very transparent with all of the requests that we've received, because ultimately it's your decision to make.
Good, thank you.
Mr. Smotherson.
Sir, thank you. So just to make sure that I understand, what's the time frame? What does that time frame look like in reference to the staff and you, Mr. Rose, getting together and deciding what the recommendation is going to look like that you're going to present to the council? And then how does that apply to what we're looking at here, option 1 and 2, and to Trevor's, if you could explain that?
Sure, I can. Sinan can share with you the time period for the completion of the space needs study. I can share with you that we wanted to at least be as transparent as possible about the options that we are currently considering. But you know, again, the intention is to come back to you with some recommendations. We wanted to advise you about what's being asked by the various departments. But again, I'll come back, and in some instances, the recommendation may be the same as what's being requested by the departments, but in some instances that may not be the case. So we need to come back with a recommendation that says, here's what's being recommended for space for each department, and here are the costs associated with that space. Sinan or Amy, do you have anything to add on that?
On the concept design that includes the options, Trevor's, my understanding is that Trevor's needs an answer from the city by the end of the month of May to be able to develop the next phase from there. That is the schematic design that, as Mr. Rose touched on, is to get into the details of the design at that point. An ultimate council presentation with a recommendation to Mr. Rose is planned for late summer and coming back to council with that as approved in likely the month of August or September.
So what's the time period? I'm sorry, for the project to be completed?
August or September
Okay.
with a final presentation to City Council.
Couple of questions that I have, and I'm not sure necessarily who they go to, and one may be more of a comment. And that is that I do think that, I think Mr. Rose touched upon this, and that is that when we are in a city that is at most a stable population, and if anything, a declining population, I realize that the services rendered do not have a linear parallel to population, but I do think it's probably something that we all need to bear in mind, that if we're currently utilizing 89,000 square feet and our population is going down, and then we're having a desire to have more square footage, I think that's probably a little bit challenging. And I do believe that, as Mr. Rose probably said, I think this may be a little bit about wants versus needs. And that's probably where we need to at least make sure that we are prudent with the decision we make and with the monies that we spend. And then, due to the fact that we are sitting in the midst of probably the single greatest work at home project the United States has ever seen, I guess I would like to ask, is there an asterisk or a footnote on this? Because I mean, clearly, I think most companies are now looking at how are they going to be adjusting their workflow, if you will, and their space needs based upon many people that were never going to be able to work at home, who are now clearly working at home, and in many ways doing the same work that they were doing when they were in an office. So, you know, the product that is before us likely may have some changes just based on what we are currently going through. No one wants to hit the back.
Gregory, did you want us to try to comment on that?
Sure.
Okay. So it's a very good point, and it's definitely something we've been working through with some of our other clients as well. In some cases, which so far has been the case with University City, there's a desire to get back to the way we were. So we'll look to University City to let us know if there's a desire to change that. But what we are doing with our other clients, and what we certainly will intend to do with University City, is look for ensuring that we are designing with flexibility and adaptability in mind. So making sure that you know, we're looking at so in another example where we're a little bit farther down the line on concept design, we have workstations that could be turned into collaborative areas instead. So if workspace becomes a place where people gather to collaborate and independent work is done at home, that's one option we have there. And then also, which we would have been doing this anyway, but knowing that there's a little bit of a bigger desired program than what departments have now, looking for those opportunities where people can share space, which also helps if you have people telecommuting, just to ensure that we're not overbuilding for some assumed growth that now likely won't happen, or that could be accommodated with teleworking. So it is, as Mr. Cusick said, it's a giant puzzle, and this also is another component that's been thrown in there, but it is also something, you know, flexible work is something that's been talked about for a long time. We've just all been thrown into it now head first as an experiment. So we'll certainly keep that in mind, but we don't have an answer, I guess I'll say, for you, but we will be thinking a lot about flexibility and adaptability, and we'll circle back with departments also to ensure that they are not planning to greatly change their intentions moving forward, or if they're still intending to get back to kind of the way things were as an overall goal.
Thank you very much, Amy and Amanda, for joining us this evening. We appreciate the information. And unless anyone else has a question, Mr. Rose, we will move to the next agenda item, EDRST.
Honorable Mayor and council members, this next item asks the mayor and council to consider the criteria for round 2 funding of the Economic Development Retail Sales Tax funds. I also would like to highlight that based upon the applications that we have received and the criteria proposed for round 2, we believe that there will be funding available after round 2 has concluded. So it is our intention to bring back to you for consideration a criteria for round 3 funding. I can share with you at this point that the intention would be to open up round 3 to more businesses that are within University City and not necessarily just to those that have contributed to the Economic Development Retail Sales Tax Fund. So with that said, I would ask Mr. Cross to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. And you touched on a lot of it, and there's really not a lot more to add in reference to round 2. If you remember, both of these came to you back on the 29th, and the primary difference between the 2 programs was round 1 was really based around those businesses that had already been approved for a federal or a state program, such as a PPP or an SBA type of loan. And the goal of that was to really get it kickstarted and get it going to where we could move forward and get those applicants out of the way. But with rounds 1 and 2, as Mr. Rose talked about, we're going to look at going to potentially round 3. But rounds 1 and 2 are primarily funded by the contributions that a business makes to the EDRST, Economic Development Retail Sales Tax. So I think the purpose of going to a potential round 3 is to really be able to assist those service-oriented businesses that don't contribute based on retail sales tax on a regular basis. So what we're proposing here tonight is just simply bringing round 2 to you to get your final blessing on it to move forward. This will be a little less restrictive than what was the criteria that was involved for round 1, in that these applicants do not have to be approved for any other type of federal or state funded project. They simply would just have to meet the criteria of contributing to EDRSTB funds. They would fall within this guideline of the time frame between May 15th and August 21st. And then they would simply have to remain in business during the length of the disbursement of these funds. The other thing on this, and that we talked about doing, is that this would be funded based on a quarterly cycle for 1 year. So whatever the business is awarded, they would receive 4 equal payments throughout the year. And upon the completion of their 4th payment, they then would have to request the loan forgiveness. It's got the same criteria. If they default, that it then reverts to a forgivable loan at a 0.5% rate over a 2-year time period. So those are the basics of it. And that's really not much different than round 1. And I would be happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.
Mr. Kusick.
Thank you, Mayor Crow. I guess my question would be more for Mr. Rose. A potential or possible round 3, when would that be implemented? I see that the round 2, the deadlines are from May 15th to August 21st. Would you wait until that August 21st deadline to implement a round 3, or what have you thought about that? Or what do you have to say about that?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Kusick, we would wait until the round 2 has been completed to ensure that all of those businesses that have contributed to the Economic Development Retail Sales Tax Fund has had an opportunity to apply and possibly be approved for those funds. It's only then that I would recommend that we start a round 3 process so that it opens it up to all businesses. But that said, we can start bringing forward to you before even the conclusion of round 2, the criteria that we would use for a round 3 funding cycle. So we're scheduled to meet in the development group tomorrow, and that's one of the topics that we'll be discussing.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hales.
Thank you. As a bit of a follow-up to Councilmember Cusick's comment, I think this round has obviously is a lot more labor intensive for administratively for staff. If you find, and I think likely in these situations you do, that the applications tend to be front loaded, I understand it's going to take a great deal of time, but if we reach a point where those applications are processed and the rate of applications have slowed down significantly or stopped, is that something, the timeline, is that something that could be revisited or revised to maybe accelerate a third round if that's still feasible?
Yes, I think that we're advertising a deadline for applications, as I understand it. And so once that deadline has concluded, yeah, it just makes sense that we would have round 3 ready to go. We are, 99% certain at this point that there is going to be some funding available for round 3. So we will start that process immediately and really just wait for the deadlines to conclude before starting that third cycle. And I just want to follow up with that. The reason, again, that we're waiting for the deadlines to conclude is because the priority that council has established thus far is for those businesses that actually contributed to the economic development retail sales tax.
Mr. Clay.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I do appreciate the thinking of the city manager and team about this round 3. It's something that we've had conversation about because, as Director Cross alluded to, this impacts many service-oriented businesses. To double click on Councilmember Hale's point, is there a world in which because it's my understanding round 2, the deadline is till August 21st. Am I reading that? Am I seeing that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. So holding strictly to that, which one cannot be faulted for doing so, August 22nd, round 3 would open up, which is, several months from now.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a world, it wouldn't be appropriate to make a commitment right now. We don't know what round 1 is going to look like in its entirety, let alone anything else. But is there a world in which we could revisit if in July we have, a paucity of trickle of applications, we could maybe look at perhaps accelerating the time in which round 3 could apply? Not making a commitment now, and that may not be possible, but just really more the openness and the monitoring associated with that to be able to move in a nimble kind of fashion if the opportunity presents itself.
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Clay, if there is a desire to, if there is a lull in the round 2 funding cycle to expedite the round 3 cycle, I would recommend that we shorten the round 2 cycle timeframe and provide me with the flexibility of extending that round 2 if appropriate, based upon the number of applications being received. And the reason that I make that recommendation is because we will be advertising the conclusion of the deadline basically for round 2. And once you advertise it, it's much more difficult to make changes.
Okay.
Mr. McMahon.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just thinking, trying to put myself in one of these businesses' position to even apply, because you need to open up within 2 weeks of getting your first quarterly payment. So if you're a business owner, it sounds like you better know you want to be going forward with whatever restrictions anybody's put on your business for opening. And there may be new restrictions. And so their first quarterly payment, I mean, I guess we're in the April, May, June quarter right now. So they're going to be having to, before they apply, they're going to want to feel confident that once they apply and that it gets through the paperwork, that they can open in 2 weeks, knowing what restrictions may or may not be in place yet. So to anticipate that, they may hold off on applying until July because they don't know what the restrictions are. It's not like there might be a flood when we come in this way. So I think to jump ahead to a third round when we don't even know what parameters might be placed on a business, to know where we're at. I mean, it's really kind of, to say that we could offer it, that it's something we're thinking about makes sense, but to really start saying, well, maybe we're not going to have that many people applying and there'll be money left over after round 2. I don't know how we can do that when we don't even know what the businesses are going to be facing in the next few weeks, let alone a month. And they're going to be having to play a game of, I've got to be open. I've got to open in 2 weeks and I got to stay open for a year, or I got to pay this back. That's a tough spot to be in, possibly. And then my only question was, what's the rationale for eligibility number 4? Businesses shall not be part of a franchise system. I'm not in a franchise system, so I don't necessarily know. But what's the rationale by excluding people in a businesses in a franchise system?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember McMahon, I believe that the interest there was to steer the program more towards small businesses that did not have access to resources that a franchise type business would have access to. That is certainly also the reason for proposing the round 3 funding. We have some businesses that operate within University City that simply are not as, don't have the resources that other franchise type businesses would have with assistance in legal or financing. So that was the reason for excluding the franchise businesses at this point, simply because the belief was that they have access to resources that places their business in a better position, I would say, to be successful than what non-franchise businesses have.
Thank you. And I would just wonder if there are different levels of what a franchise agreement would look like, and whether anybody that came in and basically said something along the lines of, I have a franchising agreement and basically I've licensed a name and I'm out here on my own after that. Now, I don't know if that's in the realm of possibility, but that almost defeats the idea there. But they'd be excluded because they've licensed a name, but they really don't have that support. They're still an independent owner, but they've got the support of a name that draws customers. Is there a way for any exceptions to these eligibility requirements in round 2?
Oh, certainly. I think that's why we're having the discussion about what criteria is it that you want to establish for round 2. So if the desire is to open it up so that a franchise business could actually apply and be funded, but they would need to go through a more rigorous process demonstrating that they don't have access to certain resources, then we can do that. The other option is simply to say that franchise businesses would be eligible as well.
I think that piggybacking on Mr. McMahon's question, I think that probably an appropriate distinction is a one between a chain business and a franchise business. The chain business is almost always 100% what one would call a company-owned store, and there are numerous examples of franchise businesses just having one location And depending on the strength of the franchisor, many franchisors do not help their franchisees at all, except by some form of access to a computer system, access to some system that they run that teaches someone about the business. I don't know that it helps them with their access to capital. Clearly, normally the franchise businesses have the opportunity to have multiple locations, which probably makes them more viable. So it may be one of those that, based on Mr. McMahon's questions, we may want to refine a little bit and maybe not have a moratorium, but maybe even have one based on size, revenues, employees, locations, something that may help those businesses. I think many people who may even be watching us will remember there's been a long time conversation going on in the Loop even of how many more franchise businesses come into the Loop versus non-franchise businesses. And so that may be part of where this language came from. So I would think that the EDRST and staff would be amenable to changes if in fact the city manager wanted to have that discussion with the folks. Mr. Clay.
Just very quickly, and I am largely in agreement with the mayor's comments and Councilmember McMahon's, but I am mindful of this reality and having conversations with the city manager and team about this program. The ability to vet, I think, is somewhat limited with the current staff. And so the more, and I'm not speaking necessarily against this idea of allowing franchisees in, but I think we just do need to be mindful. The more exceptions we allow in, the more vetting that needs to be done, the more that puts on city resources. So I'll just offer that.
Yeah. Yep. Anything else on this issue? Mr. Smotherson.
I just, thank you, Mayor Crowe. I just had a quick question, and it's, I'm new to this. I'm not familiar with the loan process. Can you explain, City Manager Rose, the reasoning behind quarterly payments? I'm not sure I understand that.
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Smotherson, for the initial round one, the program was closely tied to the payroll protection program that is being led by the federal government or the Small Business Association. So you knew at that point that they being the businesses that were successful in that program had gone through a rigorous review process. So we were really trying to piggyback on the work that had already been done by some type of institution such as the SBA. For the second round, you are lessening, you have a less stringent criteria that the businesses will meet. So we cannot be certain about the viability of those businesses long-term. So in order to minimize some of the exposure that you would have, if you stagger the payments out over a long period of time, I think that we're able to achieve the objective of ensuring that those businesses remain in business for a period of time. So that was the reason for the staggered payments.
Thank you.
Hearing nothing else on the EDRST, can we move forward with resolution number 2020-2?
Honorable Mayor.
I'm sorry, Mr. Rose.
I just wanted to make sure that I'm clear that I now have the ability to vet a franchise business and to make some decisions regarding whether those would qualify for funding. And I'm assuming based upon being a chain or a non-chain.
That would be my, I believe that I'm not seeing anyone nod their head in disagreement. Okay, now we'll move forward with resolution 2020. Is there a motion to introduce resolution 2020? Motion made by Mr. Cusick, seconded by Mr. McMahon. Any questions of the city manager regarding the budget resolution 2020? Hearing none. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. We now have new business. Who would like to introduce bill number 9404?
Hello.
Was there, Mr. Clay? Thank you very much. Ms. Reese, we have the first reading. Did I have done that incorrectly? I apologize. Ms. Reese.
An ordinance amending Chapter 215, Article 5 of the University City Municipal Code relating to offenses concerning public peace by enacting therein a new section to be known as Section 215.685, picketing before or about residence or dwelling of any individual.
Thank you. We now have bill number 9405.
Here, if it is acceptable to you and the council, I would like to read from my notes information into the record before the item is introduced.
Sure.
This item recommends the mayor and council introduce Bill 9405, being an ordinance approving the First Amendment to the Novus Redevelopment Agreement. I want to place this into some context and give you a little bit of information about how we arrived at this point. The Olive and I-170 project started as a discussion between residents of University City and a developer about ways to improve the condition of stagnant or declining housing values in the Third Ward. This discussion led to the City of University City conducting a request for proposals in March of 2017. In May of 2017, Novus Development submitted a proposal to the city regarding the redevelopment of approximately 32 acres of the north and south sides of Olive Boulevard near I-170. The city determined that it was in the best interest of the city and its residents for the development to not only redevelop the 32 acres, but allow for funding from the initial development to be used to make housing, infrastructure, and public safety improvements in the Third Ward and along the Olive Boulevard corridor. On March 28, 2018, the city published a revised notice of requests for redevelopment proposals. And on March 30th, 2018, Novus submitted a proposal. On May 23rd, 2018, and continued on June 6, 2018, June 22nd, 2018, and August 23rd, 2018, the TIF Commission held a public hearing at which all interested parties had an opportunity to be heard. On August 23rd, 2018, the TIF Commission passed a resolution recommending that the City Council approve the redevelopment plan, designate the redevelopment area as a redevelopment area pursuant to the TIF Act, approve the redevelopment project for each redevelopment project area, and adopt tax increment financing within each redevelopment area. The current redevelopment agreement was executed on June the 13th of 2019 and includes some significant benefits for the community. In addition to the 300 living wage jobs expected to be created and an estimated 400 temporary construction jobs, following are other estimated benefits that will be realized from this development. $10 million for the Third Ward to be used towards improving housing, streets, and public safety. $5 million for Olive Boulevard corridor to be used for planning, trails, lighting, and other improvements. $17 million to be used for economic development, fire protection, and parks and stormwater. Minority contracting, first source employment, and a Costco warehouse. The proposed amendments to the redevelopment agreement will not impact the overall scope of the project, but does alter when the developer would have access to TIF funding to extend and extends the timeline for the developer to perform. The developer's initial obligation is to obtain 16 acres of property for the north face anchor. At that time, the developer will have access to the initial 55.5 million TIF notes. The developer has until January 5th, 2021 to acquire options or titles to that 16 acres or to initiate condemnation, and until December 31, 2021, to acquire options or title to the remainder of the north phase and the south phase. The developer must post a letter of credit as security for its promise to promptly develop property in the south phase that is acquired by condemnation. The developer will have rights to TIF notes in excess of $55.5 million upon acquiring at least 10 acres of property in the south phase, closing on the financing for the construction of at least 30,000 square feet of residential/commercial space in the south phase, and either one, closing on the financing for at least 50,000 square feet, or two, entering into a lease agreement for sale or sale contract for construction of a hotel of at least 60 rooms. In conclusion, the proposed amendment moves this development to a phased approach and enhances Novus's ability to gain financing for the project. On the matter of the anchor tenant site, it has always been identified as being at least 100,000 square feet as reflected on page 12 of the existing redevelopment agreement. Tonight's amendment will increase the minimum amount to 140,000 square feet. While we have started our review of a Costco building elevations that exceeds this minimum, there is no guarantee we can provide to you the building size until Costco concludes their due diligence and determine if the site meets their specifications. However, we are making every effort to place the city and the project in the best position to be successful. Restructuring our local economy will be difficult and will take time. However, with the unemployment reaching levels exceeding the Great Depression, this project is even more important to University City and to our region. I strongly recommend your approval of bringing an estimated 700 jobs to our community and to the region. And I would ask John to review with you the zoning process, which is in addition to what is being required as a part of the redevelopment agreement.
Thank you. So the redevelopment agreement, section 3.7 specifically states that the developer will pursue planned development district zoning for this particular project. And the municipal code has a section dealing with planned development districts. And there are a number of requirements, but the purpose of having a planned development district is to provide a means of achieving greater flexibility in the development of land in a manner that's not always possible in conventional zoning districts. This is a general commercial district, and so the process would be that there would have to be a bill introduced amending the zoning map to change this from general commercial to planned development district. And there's a process involving the Plan Commission, and the Plan Commission would consider that map amendment as it does any zoning amendment. But also there is a preliminary development plan that is drafted and reviewed by the Plan Commission before the map amendment goes to the City Council. So what the Plan Commission is doing is not only is it considering whether it should be a planned development district, but it considers what the particular elements of this project should be. You know, the building size. You can have green space. You can have the setbacks from the surrounding areas. There are a whole host of issues that the Plan Commission can consider. Now, we do have a preliminary site plan
that's in the development agreement that's been approved by the council. That is just a preliminary site plan. It's not the final one. So this process that I'm discussing would basically take that preliminary site plan and move it to a final site plan type situation, and that you would be able to be more specific with the exact development that would occur within the planned development district, and the various uses, and again, some of the density requirements and other issues that you have. So there would be a public hearing. The public hearing would be before the council. That public hearing must take place before the council may approve a zoning map amendment, as well as the preliminary development plan. So the public would have an opportunity before the council votes on the zoning map and votes on this preliminary plan, after the plan commission reviews it and there's engagement there, and before it votes. So and once it votes, if the vote is to approve the plan development district and the preliminary plan, there'd be some additional review and work before you have a final development plan. The final development plan would be done by way of an ordinance. There is no need for another public hearing between approval of the rezoning and the preliminary plan. And there are some changes that can be made that's spelled out in the zoning code, but essentially you should keep the plan that was preliminarily approved. Again, there can be some refinements, some changes that aren't that don't materially change the project. So that is the process. Council has done some planned development districts in the past, and so this one will be handled the same way as the others procedurally.
Mr. Miller, I was just going to say, Mayor, that concludes the introduction of the item.
Thank you. Is there who would like to introduce? Mr. McMahon, may we have the first reading?
An ordinance approving a First Amendment to the redevelopment agreement in connection with the Olive Boulevard Commercial Corridor and Residential Conservation Development Plan.
Thank you very much. And to all of the citizens who are watching, even though you were led to believe by one of our citizens that a vote would be taken tonight, clearly that is not the protocol that is used by our council. And I do hope that as people move forward with this, that if they have questions about how these matters move forward, that they feel free to ask any member of council or the city manager, the city clerk, or the city attorney. There is no vote to be taken tonight. And the questions that were whirling about social media, about the questions about the anchor, have seemed to cause a number of members of our community to be unnecessarily concerned. And I do hope that to all of our citizens, that when you get these emails from folks who don't necessarily always have all the information at their fingertips, I hope that you will take a pause before you hit the forward button and send it around to the community, because I think we've had a number of people who have opined about this situation incorrectly, and I'm not sure that that has helped with the discussion at all for this matter moving forward. So I do hope there's a little bit, as the city manager and I've said, while this virus is going on, we're kind of all hoping that people deal with a little bit of grace towards each other. And yet in this case, we seem to have just this miscommunication and this idea that a vote is happening tonight, when in fact, I think most of the people writing the emails have been around long enough to know that an ordinance is introduced at one meeting and then voted on at a subsequent meeting. So with that, are there any questions or comments of city council members for any of the commissions or any businesses they would like to discuss at this time? Ms. Carr.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. I would like to address some of the things that Mr. Rose said and some of the things that the mayor just said. First, Costco is not pulled out. I mean, that seemed to be the major concern, and therefore the council should not approve anything. And as the mayor said, next and most importantly, the process is proceeding as prescribed by our charter and the state statutes. Up until now, these legal and contractual issues have been confidential. But now that a proposal was assembled and placed on the agenda by the city manager, we can first discuss this publicly. Up till now, we haven't been able to. The council has not stuck their heads in the sand. We have been actively engaged, as we are always actively engaged. I realize that the community has been taught in the previous few years that that things go on behind the scenes. I can assure you that that no longer happens. That we are doing our due diligence, and we are not going to push anything on the community as a surprise, the way that, for instance, the EMS outsourcing was pushed on us. So I would hope that of the handful of people that wrote me, that they are watching tonight's meeting so that they can get the accurate information, that they can find out what is really being proposed. As I don't think that many people actually read the amendment that was included in the packet. The clarifications have been provided tonight, and I hope that that people, if they have questions, will come to the source directly rather than relying upon misinformation and innuendo. I think that was a great disservice to the community. So as the mayor said, the council meets to discuss and reflect tonight after a first reading. And then we have 2 weeks, as we always do, before we come back for a second and third reading, and then a discussion, usually a robust discussion, and then a vote. So we wouldn't even consider anything earlier than the 26th of May, which is plenty of time to answer questions or to engage with our constituents. This is a COVID-19 new world. We cannot hold public meetings. We cannot even be in a room with more than 10. And as you can see, we don't even meet with the rest of our colleagues in an effort to prevent the spread of this devastating, quite frankly, disease. And if you doubt for a moment what can happen to people, I would suggest that you look at the Washington Post has 2 articles on symptoms and manifestations of this disease. So the normal, public discussions or town hall meetings, which we might hold, are kind of off the table. The best we can do is what we are doing right now, and we are being clearly transparent. So strangely, no questions were asked of my colleagues or me, or any requests for explanations. In fact, we received directives that seem to be based on the misleading information provided in an email chain from and in social media by a couple of people. I'd hope that citizens would seek their clarifications and answers, again, directly from the source. So I thank the city manager tonight and our city attorney for covering the details of this. This probably wouldn't happen under any other circumstance, but it's important for us to explain something that has clearly caused so much consternation, and I think that we're more than willing to do it. But we also see a benefit in these phasing modifications, as Mr. Rose clearly designed. It is a COVID-19 world. The economy has cratered, and our social interactions have been, in a sense, devastated. So I hope we will take a breath and know that this council has in no way acted in any manner other than that which is completely and totally transparent. And just as a couple of years ago, we sat through many, many hours and multiple continued meetings, public hearing meetings. We have been open to questions, to suggestions, but we are clearly your representatives. And I hope that you will ask the city, you'll ask your council members when you have questions, rather than assuming that the information provided by people who don't have access to all the information is the correct information. Thank you, Mayor.
Anything else? Mr. McMahon.
Yeah, if I'm assuming are we on council comments? Because I didn't want to.
I think I sort of muddled those two together. I apologize.
And thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to thank the folks that stopped out at the McNair building and dropped off food for the mayors for food drive. I think a lot of us were out there helping collect that, and it was a good day to see people in this time still braving, getting close nearby as we dropped off food and picked it up out of their trunks. So I wanted to thank the people that stopped out and did that this last Saturday.
Mr. Hales.
Okay, so we are on council comments.
I started it.
With that, I believe we're winding down.
Thank you. I wanted to thank the mayor and Councilmember Carr for her comments, and I agree with Councilmember McMahon. I spent 2 hours Saturday morning for that food drive, and I think it was a great success. I just want to follow up on one of the final things Councilmember Carr stated about having all the information, and just a caveat to that. All the information, all the information that is out there is in the redevelopment agreement. That is online, that is on the city's website. And with the flurry of emails and social media posts, and I think there was an effort that probably reached 10 or more thousand people on social media. One of the claims, as the city manager referenced earlier, relative to the 100,000 square feet, and that being somehow represented as, oh, the anchor must have changed. That was in the original development agreement under section 2.3A. That was out there. That is on the city website. That has always been the case. I have had a few questions, phone calls about from folks who have seen this. And as I think the city manager said tonight, there's clearly no question about who the anchor is. Not only that, this agreement and this amendment now increases that number of a minimum of 100,000 to a minimum of 140,000. So I just want to say, I know my colleagues are likely all on the same page. I have zero concerns at this point about the anchor and changing. And lastly, it really, I know it's tedious to sometimes fact check information that's put out there. That's something that a number of us have done for a number of years. And I appreciate anyone who goes out there and fact checks. I fact check the information still, just to make sure that I know that what I'm talking about and what I'm understanding is correct. So I do encourage everybody who has a concern to reach out. I'm happy to share the information, just as the city manager did earlier. So that's really all I want to say. Please, I'll help anybody find the information they want to find, but let's fact check the information, please.
Thank you. Any other comments from members of council? For myself, as we move forward, I too would like to thank all of my colleagues and the citizens who helped with the Mayors for Meals fun time on Saturday. It's nice to see everybody again, masks and all, gloves and all. And I know with Councilmember Hales, who helped coordinate the first responder parade for the 7300 block of Pershing on Saturday. That was quite fun and enjoyable to get to watch everyone have an enjoyable evening, and to thank the first responders for all they do. Julius Hunter did a great job of putting that event together for his neighbors to show their appreciation to all the first responders. With that, I would welcome a motion to go into closed session according to Missouri Revised Statute 610.021, legal actions, causes of action, litigation involving a public governmental body, and any confidential or privileged communications between that body and its representatives or attorney. Is there such a motion? Motion made by Mr. Hale, seconded by Mr. McMahon. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those in, can we have a roll call vote?
Councilmember Kusick.
Aye.
Councilmember Smotherson.
He is
Muted.
Aye.
all right, there we go. Thank you.
Councilmember Clay.
Aye.
Councilmember Carr.
Aye.
Councilmember McMahon.
Aye.
Councilmember Hales.
Aye.
Mayor Crowe.
Aye. To the members of the public watching, thank you very much for participating in our city council meeting this evening. We will now close this meeting, but the city council is staying in session, and we will move to closed session. Thank you very much.